There's a place.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to do a quick tutorial on how to put this placket together. I've gotten a lot of questions from it and I thought it might be best to just make a video just to help anybody that needed better clarity on how to put it together. But this is focusing on the tunic shirt that was created. I will add a link down below if you want to see the original image. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps a lot, tremendously, as a small business owner trying to start up. But besides that, let's go ahead and get started. First thing you need to do, make sure that your neckline is already complete. We have 2 plackets. Make sure you add your interfacing, and you have your shirt. The center front needs to have that cut out, so make sure you have that. It should be approximately 1/2 inch wide, I believe. I didn't have the pattern, so I had to make one up. So just make sure you follow your pattern instructions and sizing as far as how to cut it. Once your neckline is complete and your neck facing is attached to your neckline, you are ready to attach it to the placket. Using your measuring gauge, you can measure 1/2 inch from the top edge of the placket. From that top edge, from that marking of 1/2 inch, line it up to the folded edge of the neckline. Go ahead and pin it all the way down. And once you reach the bottom where the opening is for the placket, then you can mark it 1/2 inch below that. And then that marking is to show you where you are going to stop and backstitch. As you can see here.
What I came there to see.
Now you are ready to start sewing. My sewing machine right now is not doing any back stitching. It's almost as if it's on strike. So I've been having to sink my needle, pivot, and rotate. But definitely back stitch at the top and at the bottom, as you need to secure those areas. That way they don't unravel. So sink your needle once you reach your marking, and then backstitch, or if you're having issues like mine, sink your needle, rotate your material back around, and just top stitch a few stitches right on top of that previous stitch you created. That way it's creating a backstitch and it'll lock your material from unraveling or unthreading. As you can see here, I backstitch right at that line, stopping at that marking point that we made at the bottom, 1/2 inch away from the opening. Now that you're done with one side, you'll repeat on the other side. Make sure that your stopping points are leveled. So if you need to grab a ruler and make sure that it's perpendicular to that center front, or it's matching up, do whatever you need to do to make it even, as this is a focal point and it will show if it's not aligned. Now that both sides are sewn, you are going to make diagonal lines with your tailor's chalk or pencil from that corner where we stopped, which is pretty much where the notch was, up to the opening of the center front. They're simply going to be diagonal lines, and we're adding those lines as a cut guide. Make sure when you cut, you do not cut past your thread. You're not cutting into your seam. You're stopping right there as a stopping point. But now I shine with your reflection on me. I'm getting back up on my feet. That you showed up was written in my palm. You are So we are getting close to being done. You can definitely maneuver your material around to see what it's looking like. So far, so good. Once we tuck it in, we'll top stitch and we'll pretty much wrap it up. But the next part from here would be to complete the neckline. So go ahead and turn your material onto the wrong side. And this time what you're going to do is open up your placket, fold it on itself so that the interfacing is on the outside. So you're gonna fold it right sides together. That was tricky to say. Remember, for the placket, the ironing is your best friend. So because the creases were already there, it kind of made it easier for me to keep the seam allowance even. But if the crease wasn't there, I'd have to eyeball how much seam allowance I have. And if the seam allowance is off, then it won't match to the other side once you're done. So make sure you iron it. Just iron it before you start. And then from there, you can start pinning. Once you have it pinned across, then you are ready to sew it. Make sure that you back stitch. So you are going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or whatever the seam allowance was in the pattern. I don't have it. I think it was a student that probably was like, hey, could you show how to do this? That way, for the event, I'll know what to do, which is why I posted the review for the sewing pattern. So if you guys have any suggestions, by all means, I'm all up for it. I'll be happy to make the garment and just go through the process with you as you sew. Once you've sewn across, grab your scissors and start trimming. You are going to trim the corners. That way when you turn it inside out, it's not bulky. Even though I added all of those trims, I still did not trim this section enough because when I turned it, it was still a little bit bulky on the outside. But again, ironing is your best friend. Once you turn it, you can always iron it down so that everything stays in place. Use a pencil, something that is not sharp, to press out the corners. Be gentle. Don't put too much pressure because that can cause it to create a hole in the tiny corner. Once you have it turned, tuck your seam allowance into the placket and you are going to top stitch on the right side all the way down. Once you get to the very bottom where the opening is, just be careful so that you don't capture the other side. Make sure the only thing you're capturing is the side of the placket.
I guess it would be nice to belong in your arms. I hope you feel the same.
So in order for you to sew this placket down, and in order for you to add in that edge stitch, you might have to adjust the position of your needle. Do not change the width of this stitch, just adjust your needle. If you center your needle, it will actually be easier for you to hold your material down and complete your edge stitching because you can line it up to the center of your presser foot. Depending on the type of machine you have, sometimes they come preset to the far left or the far right. It all varies. So just if you can adjust the placement, go ahead and adjust it. Once you get to the very end here, just make sure that everything is lined up. Move your material out of the way so that you are able to sew all the way down to the corner.
Far from all worries and troubling sound, when I go there to be by myself.
You are going to have to repeat it for the other side, but once you are done, it will look a little something like this. You'll still have the flap at the bottom that needs to be tucked in. So once you tuck it in, you can flip the bottom part of the shirt upwards. Make sure you line up your placket so that it's nice and even. If it is shifting out of place, you can use a couple of pins to pin it down. That way it's stabilized and it's, it's lining up properly. But go ahead and fold the bottom edge of your shirt. Make sure that it's lined nice and even. Again, this is going to be a focal point, so if there's anything wrong going on there, it will show. But just be careful. Use your rulers if you have to. There's a saying that says measure twice, cut once. I will measure 50 times to make sure that I have it right, because once you cut down into that material, there's no going back. Okay, you have to commit. Unless you decide to do patchwork. But pin the bottom of the garment onto the placket, and you could add a couple of pins in place on the side just so that you can stabilize it. On this part, all we're going to do is stitch a perpendicular stitch across the plaque so that the little tab here stays down in place. I did use a pen to mark it. Again, if you have light material or you have one of those pens that as soon as it touches something it runs ink, obviously it's not the best thing to use. You can definitely use a tailor's chalk. You can use erasable, one of those what do you call them? Erasable markers or whatever, a pencil, crayon. Just be careful on the material that you use it on, because sometimes I've used, without thinking, I've used wax tailor's chalk on fabric, and then when it was time for me to iron it, the wax melted into the fabric and it was showing. So lesson learned the hard way. Don't do that. Just use tailor's chalk or a pencil, something that you can easily take down. Since this is not a garment that somebody's gonna wear, it's just something that I cut randomly so that I can provide the video, the content. I'm not really concerned if the pins or the markings, they show on the other side. For this stitch here, be sure to back stitch, because if you don't, there's a lot of pressure that goes into that corner. There's a possibility it may unravel. So keep it nice and tight and straight, and that way it's nice and even. Now that you are done with the placket, you are ready to start trimming. Get rid of all of your loose threads. They are all over the place. Clean up your garment. Make sure you iron, and this is how your placket should look like. Nice and clean. The upper edge is complete. If you have a standing collar, it all depends on where you want it to stop. I think for the garment, the tunic, it stopped before it got to the actual placket itself. So now that you're done, it's a perfect time to trim and iron. And that is it. If you have any questions at all, drop them down below. Share, subscribe. You can also message me via Facebook. I'll be happy to answer. Happy sewing.
And when I space out, I see the possibilities unfolding the way that I want.